welcome to One Good Life. In this channel, we extract insights from modern science and ancient wisdom that can help us live a happier and more meaningful life. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe down below and stay in touch. So today we want to answer the question of what does scientific research of meditation really say? Before starting, I want to clarify a few things. When I talk about research, I'm talking about researchers from universities trying to conduct rigorous scientific studies on participants to try to measure certain effects of meditation and certain falsifiable claims about meditation. I'm basing some of these comments on research from 2017 and earlier. However, I have watched recent interviews with the same researchers which have led me to believe that the state of the research hasn't changed all that much in the last few years. We see a lot of variation in how and what the research is conducted on. So we see participants being to meditate for different lengths of times each session and also for different duration over time. Another challenge is that there's many different types of meditation out there which have a basis on some very ancient traditions. The first very common type is the type where you focus on something. Transcendental meditation is an example of this, but basically any kind of meditation where you're focusing on one object, which could be the breath or an image or a mantra, but the idea is basically you try to avoid any other thoughts or distractions that come in. The second important type is the mindfulness type, the meta-awareness type. Meta-awareness is a term we use in neuroscience, which means being aware of what the mind is actually doing. So, for instance, sometimes we might get lost in thought, or we might be reading and we might realize a few pages later that we've been distracted all the way through. That moment when we realize we've got meta-awareness. The third quite common type, which you might have heard of or even tried yourself, is the loving kindness type. In this type of meditation, you are encouraged to have positive thoughts and wish good things to initially people you love, people in your life, close ones, and also then extend it to strangers. For instance, the barista that you might have only talked to once or twice, and then later on extend it even to people you actively dislike. This type of meditation has shown to increase compassionate feelings and also gratitude, which is highly related with other measures of well-being. Some of these qualities of mind we have taken as fixed before, and in the last few decades we are starting to understand that this can be trained, sometimes through pretty simple exercises, some of which involve meditation. Modern mobile apps around often combine these different types into the same session. Another concept in research which is significant is the difference between altered states and altered traits. So the first one refers to changes that we experience and changes in the brain that we can detect through brain scans while the person is meditating. While the second type is related to changes that we experience and we can analyze after the session in what neuroscientists call the base state, the default mode. Another challenge in assessing some of the studies is that they vary a lot in how long these participants have been training for. So some of the most extreme examples are of meditators who have meditated up to tens of thousands of hours in their lives. These are very long-term and very experienced meditators. Whereas some other studies focus on people who have meditated less, even down to people who have maybe only meditated about 7 hours, combined, divided in 2 weeks or 8 weeks, for instance. Even if we don't plan to meditate as many hours as some of these people do, it's still good as scientists to study these extreme cases, because it could give us some insight into what are the maximum benefits, so-called maximum benefits we can expect if we are to recommend these for instance, patients as specific health interventions. Something really interesting that we see in very experienced meditators is a lot of high amplitude gamma oscillations. We all have these. Typically they occur when we get some insight into a problem we are trying to solve, or sometimes when we combine perceptions through different senses, such as looking at an apple and also biting into one. However, these typically last only a fraction of a second. But in very experienced meditators, we see them having these for minutes or even hours at a time, which is very unusual. And we also sometimes can measure this during their sleep. So a side note here, they often describe their experience as some kind of open and spacious awareness, which isn't too different from what certain traditions have described as enlightenment. So current studies are trying different things, such as having these people sleep in the lab every time they notice some of these gamma oscillations, waking them up and asking them directly what's on their mind. Some warning here is that although it's very cool to know and to maybe try to think about what qualities of mind some of these people have, it's very important not to get too attached and obsess over these experiences. The idea behind some of these ancient practices has always been to kind of detach ourselves from certain cravings. And if we actually obsess over some of these experiences or achieving some kind of deep state, we might actually be going against that, and it's definitely not recommended. Ideally, for studying this type of thing, we would like longitudinal studies with a lot of people over a large number of years, and we would also like what is called randomized control trials, where there's a control group that is given an alternative treatment. For instance, it could be a treatment that is commonly given for people under certain prescriptions. And also typically we would like these to be double-blinded, so we would like the people who are taking the study not to know whether they've been given the real thing or the control treatment. And also ideally we would like the researcher not to know as well, so that they don't implicitly or unconsciously influence the participants. Now, there's a tricky thing here with meditation regarding how to design these placebo effects. So the idea, for instance, if you're studying the effect of a certain pill on health, it's like two people would be given the same looking pill, but one would actually contain the chemical you're testing, and the other one wouldn't. However, here, some people have designed certain placebos, such as telling people that they're going to be trying this new type of meditation and getting them to sit down and just do nothing for a while. However, surprisingly or not surprisingly, they have seen some positive effects of even just doing that. And ideally, we would want these studies to show significant positive effects for all participants. However, what we do see here is that it really varies a lot depending on the participant, so it's a bit hard so far to really know who to prescribe this to. Exactly. So how do scientists study this? They often use a technique called fMRI, which is a more advanced version of common MRIs, image scanning. And here it's also tricky because sometimes it's not that easy to understand what a change in the brain actually means. Another issue here is that people's brains vary quite a lot. So modern studies have been using machine learning techniques to try to personalize the mapping between certain activities and what the brain of the specific person actually shows. A way in which this is done is before starting the studies, some people are asked to close their eyes and think of certain things, such as now think of the past, now think of the present, now focus on your breath, typically for short intervals of time where that's achievable without distraction. And then you actually map what the brain of the person looks at each of these stages. And then throughout the study where people meditate over days, weeks or years, you kind of have a baseline which you can compare against, which is not just an average of all brains but specific to that person. Another big area here which has raised a lot of questions is what the project really is here. So often a lot of these studies focus on concrete improvements to our individual self. However, the context in which these practices have been embedded for most of their existence has been communal, and there's also been an underlying ethical or religious or spiritual context as well, which leads to the question whether some of the positive effects we've seen in long-term meditators are perhaps associated with that external context and not necessarily with meditation itself. Also, the motivation for meditating throughout the years has often been not that much about ourselves, but more as a way of becoming a better person, someone who's more available and present for others, for our loved ones, and for the relationships around us. So it's often been more about being selfless as opposed to improving ourselves. And many people have justifiably asked whether stripping the practice away from that objective is detrimental to some of the effects that we might find or not find. So now to the actual results. So as a general rule, what I've seen is that meditation has often proven to be just as effective as other common interventions and techniques used. So this is not necessarily a bad thing for a few reasons. One is that some people might actually prefer these meditation-based treatments over other methods. Sometimes meditation has shown to be more effective than certain medications, which can have positive consequences. This is on average. However, for some people, meditation-based techniques have actually been more successful than other types of treatment. So it seems like it's definitely a very good option for therapists and mental health professionals to keep in mind and to keep using, and certainly for scientists to keep investigating. So the first area where meditation has seen to have a very positive impact is on the recurrence of depression, so on relapsing into further depressive episodes. The second one is anxiety, where we also see positive effects. The third one is pain. So what we understand about pain nowadays is that it kind of has two components. One part is the actual raw sensations associated with feeling some unease or discomfort. And the second part is the actual suffering around it. So we have seen that patients with chronic pain often feel discomfort and suffering even when anticipating pain, because they know that based on their experience, when they stand up and try to walk, they will experience pain. So it's kind of like they start feeling it earlier. And meditation has shown very promising results for this second component of pain. It seems that we can train ourselves to become more resilient, and also this might have very positive implications for issues such as opioid abuse. The next area is social stress. So the average person would show an increased secretion of certain hormones associated with stress, such as cortisol, when encountering a situation that is commonly stressful. So the way this is tested is participants are put in front of a panel of stern-looking people, and they need to have an interview with them where they need to sell themselves and present themselves as best as possible, and also they need to do some complex mental arithmetic, such as subtracting 13s out of a large number. These hormones are associated with the fight or flight response, and we do see meditators exhibiting less of this stressful response, which can be very useful sometimes. The second last area is self-regulation, controlling impulses, which is associated with a few different things. There's evidence that meditation strengthens some certain circuits in the brain that are associated with controlling these impulses. Some of these studies have been conducted in prisons and have shown some promising results on recidivism, but it also could be associated with managing our attention if we're getting distracted on our daily tasks, especially during lockdown or while working from home. And the last one I would like to touch on is brain aging. So this is really, really interesting evidence where we are seeing that some of these very experienced meditators have a slowing brain aging process than the average person in their same age group. We don't necessarily see evidence of meditation reversing brain aging, but it has the potential of slowing it. So I am leaving out some of the other effects that are currently being studied because there is perhaps not enough evidence yet, or even if we do have concrete evidence of people experiencing some of these, we might not have enough large enough studies to really recommend it for the wider population, or we might not have been able to replicate some of these on a large enough number of people. So some of these effects are around physical illnesses and also controlling physical properties of our bodies, such as raising body temperature, controlling, slowing metabolism, changing heart rate. There is some current studying on epigenetics, on effects on gene expression, which could be interesting. And also there's some studies being done on the effect of meditation on inflammation of the body and the mind, which could be related to some neurodegenerative diseases. I want to give 2 warnings here. The first one is that there have been some rare instances of people experiencing paradoxical effects, which is when a medication, for instance, or a treatment causes the inverse effect of what it's meant to have. So we see this with certain psychiatric medication symptoms, and we have seen some people experiencing or reporting higher levels of anxiety and depression, including panic attacks or, in rare cases, psychotic events. Some of these have been associated with people trying to meditate more intensely or for longer than average and or longer than normal. However, I would say that if you're meditating and you ever experience any unusual or negative symptoms, definitely stop and talk to a professional health provider. Some people also, even those who experience positive effects with meditation, find that focusing on their breath makes them a little unease. Sometimes I experience this, so in those cases it's encouraged to focus on some other object of attention, such as external sounds or the feeling of her bodies on the chair. The second one, based on the research that I've been reading, it seems like there's no one magic way of doing it. So definitely stay away from anyone in the internet or in person who's trying to sell you that one mantra, that one course that will change your life and finally teach you how to meditate, especially if it comes at a high cost. It's not worth it, and there's so many amazing apps that you can access for free or paying a very small subscription fee. So ultimately, why does having sound scientific findings matter at all? The first reason is for health practitioners who want to recommend or who want to know whether they should be recommending meditation to people. They want to know who are the most likely patients to benefit from it, for how long should they recommend that they do it for, and how often. The second reason is whenever we are discussing policy recommendations and how to use tax-paying money. So governments often invest in certain treatments which are meant to enhance the well-being and mental health of the population, and has other positive effects such as preventing certain episodes which can end up costing the taxpayer more if the person needs hospitalization, for instance. And also, if we understand why certain treatments work and what components of the treatments are the most critical, we can then tune the practices and also design better treatments and better therapies that involve these practices and utilize them in the most productive and efficient way. Sometimes hearing that a friend of us has tried meditation and has had good results might be enough for some of us, and that's okay. Also, experimenting with it and seeing how we personally feel, it's great, especially when it comes to treatments such as meditation, where the risk associated with trying isn't high. I would definitely not recommend following anecdotal evidence to, for instance, try certain medications that you haven't been prescribed, or to avoid taking the medications that you have been prescribed, and other examples where the risk is clearly much higher. I've heard people say that even if meditation had no effect on you or was even bad for you, they would likely still be tempted to do it just because of how interesting it is and how much people can learn about themselves and the way our minds work and where our mind goes when it wanders. Many people find that it helps them challenge negative self-narratives that they have about themselves, which have practical effects in the way they conduct themselves in real-life situations. So ultimately, the way I see it is I would like to incorporate meditation as a habit, as a sustainable habit, which I can keep doing throughout my life. So when we think about certain workouts and cardio exercise, we can actually find concrete evidence and concrete suggestions on how much we should be doing it as a minimum and how often, and it would be great to have some of this information for meditation as well. And just like the gym, we wouldn't expect to just go to the gym intensively for 2 weeks and then just keep all the health benefits associated with it. We need to keep doing it, and that's also the way I think about meditation. I hope that throughout my life I can keep setting some minutes apart daily or weekly to train my mind and cultivate positive qualities of mind, and I hope I can use meditation to reflect on what matters most to me and to be more productive on that, both work-wise and also in my personal life. Well, that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, leave a comment down below and subscribe if you want to stay in touch. Bye!